a Wednesday show. We're glad you're with us. This is the first round. There are so many things going on in the world of sports. I usually have a skeleton list of things that we're going to talk about on the show. But this week, being October, you've got NBA, you've got MMA, you've got the NHL kicking off, you've got college football playoffs, we've got boxing news. We've got Gronk and Kaepernick possibly coming back. We have NFL news. We have all the college football playoff breakdowns. There is so much going on. I didn't know where to start. I threw it on a piece of paper, and this is what came out. Colin Kaepernick possibly returning to the NFL. He's having an open workout sponsored by the NFL. Who does that? That's never happened in my lifetime. I've been around, unfortunately, for more than 40 years. Gronk, rumors starting to swirl that Gronk will come back. I've got quotes, information from Robert Kraft, Tom Brady, and my own personal opinion on it. College football rankings come out week 2. LSU number 1, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, then Bama. Chris and I are going to disagree on that one. Bama goes on the road to Mississippi State this week, then Western Carolina, and at Auburn to finish up their season. The schedule that they've had up until this point hasn't been that solid. That's what's bringing them down. We're going to talk about Georgia going on the road to Auburn. Auburn's getting 3 points. I'm going to give you a hint right now. I'm loving Auburn plus the 3 points. Penn State, Ohio State, and Minnesota all in action this week. Minnesota, off that big win against Penn State at home, goes on the road to Iowa, and they're getting 3 points. Somebody knows something I don't know. The biggest game possibly of the week, Oklahoma going on the road to undefeated 9-0 Baylor. Baylor has 3 more games plus a possible championship game. If they win those, are they in the college football playoff as an undefeated team from the Big 12? Chris and I will talk about that. Oregon playing at home against Arizona. Keep their college football playoff hopes alive. They've got to get that win. I think they will. They're favored by 27.5 points. LSU goes on the road to Ole Miss. Wake, number 19, goes to Clemson. Clemson's given 34.5 points. Something about that line doesn't seem right to me. I'm liking Wake plus the points. I think Wake's a pretty solid team. Michigan versus Michigan State. I think this is going to be a bloodbath. This is my teaser special of the week. I am 12-1 this year against the spread on my teaser picks. Finally, in college football, number 24, Navy goes on the road to Notre Dame, given 7 points. And Chase Young gets a 1-game suspension on top of the one he's already served. He won't play this week, and then he's going to come back. Kirk Herbstreit last week on College Game Day said that he'd be out possibly for 4 weeks, although that wasn't signed, with the blood of a newly born lamb. He gets 1 more week. Arkansas trying to lure Gus Malzahn away from Auburn. That doesn't make any sense to me. Why would Gus Malzahn leave to go put out a garbage fire and rebuild that whole program? I'm not getting that. Our top 5 list this week. Chris and I will be discussing the top 5 coaches ever. Any sport, any decade, top 5 coaches ever, in our opinion. We'll be getting into that. A little bit about Major League Baseball. It's trying to keep itself relevant. The big problem with Major League Baseball, though, in the offseason, keeping relevant is, one, their draft only has about 6,000 rounds in it. I mean, I don't even know who's up. There's no combine. There's no shows about it. And once free agency dies off and the winter meetings die off, the hot stove talk dies off, then everything about Major League Baseball goes away. It's really hard for them to stay relevant, which means it's really hard for me to stay excited about it. There are a couple things going on, though, in Major League Baseball. I want to get into the Houston Astros ex-pitching coach, Mike Fiers, talking about the stealing the signs and using cameras to do it. Stealing signs isn't illegal in baseball. There's actually no rule against it. Once you bring electronics into it, then it becomes really illegal. This happened in 2017, so it would have been Houston against the LA Dodgers. If that was going on, I'm really interested to see the facts about it, because I'm a facts-based guy, and I want to know exactly what was going on before I form an opinion. But if that was going on, that's some pretty serious allegations against the Houston Astros. And having said that, I haven't even talked NBA, boxing, MMA, or the NHL yet, and we're ready to start the show. Chris, it's good to have you back in our St. Jude studios after a 1-game respite, and you got a break from me?
I didn't get a break from you, but no, I was glad to be back.
Well, it's good to have you back here in the show. So let's get the show started with Colin Kaepernick. I don't even know where to start with this. You and I were talking before the show, and I was saying, have you ever, because you've been following sports, only because you're a little younger than me, almost as long as I have. I've never heard of the NFL is sponsoring a open workout for Colin Kaepernick in Atlanta, right?
Right.
It's in Atlanta. And all 32 teams are invited. Mm-hmm. Now, that's one half of the story. The other half of the story is what is Colin Kaepernick going to bring? Where's his head at? Does he have a killer instinct? Is he in shape? How's his cardio? I want to know what's going on mentally. If I'm a GM, I said, I want to bring him in and have him throw for an hour, hour and a half, run drills. Mm-hmm. Then I want to get his cardio going, see if he's in shape cardio-wise. Have him shower. Let's have a lunch. And the next 3 hours, I want to get in his head. Is this guy going to be saying racist stuff, outlandish stuff? Is he going to be a good fit in my locker room? Does he have the killer instinct to win? Is this just a PR move by the NFL or him? And I want to know all that stuff before I sign on the dotted line that I want this guy to be my quarterback. Now, I think he should be, again, he's been out of the league for 3 years, but if we look at Colin Kaepernick, 2016, which is the last year he played, if we just take that, and that's a big if, because we're talking about 3 years off of the football field, out of competition, I thought if we take that Colin Kaepernick, he's good enough to be a backup, at the least a backup on some team in the NFL. Let's start with the NFL sponsoring a free agent who's not in the league workout that I've never seen before. What am I supposed to think about this?
Well, first, I've never seen any sport, whether it was football, baseball, basketball, any sport, that basically did a one-man combine for any player, regardless of what. So that's first. That's one thing that I've never seen before.
Right.
The second thing is with Colin Kaepernick. This is not necessarily a precedent. You've had the Miami Dolphins who signed. Oh goodness, I can't think of the quarterback. He's on the tip of my mind. Who hadn't played it down in a year, mm-hmm. and they signed him to play. So
right, but the NFL. You're talking about Fitzpatrick,
no.
Ryan Fitzpatrick?
No.
Okay. Are you,
he used to
the former Bear quarterback from Vandy.
There you go, Jay Cutler,
right?
Right.
But here's the thing: he wasn't out of the league with all this other social stigma going on,
right.
and anti-cop and making kneeling and all this other stuff. This is a whole new beast that's all original, organic to itself that I've never seen. Have you?
We've seen social commentary. I mean, you've seen it before. I mean,
right, but the NFL taking a situation like this and having a free agent workout for one free agent. How many free agents are out there now?
No, you haven't seen that for one person. But
right, so that's what's so freak about it to me.
Well, it's freak, but as far as the social stuff that Colin took on, that stuff is happened before. I mean, you have a record with Craig Hodges. You have it with Sharif Abdul-Rahman. Chris Johnson. I'm gonna call him Chris Johnson.
Right.
So I mean, you've had that before in sports where.
Right, but I'm just taking down the fact that the NFL is throwing a combine basically for one player who's a free agent. And if I'm out on the street right now and I've been cut, played 2 or 3 games, somebody let me go, I'm like, why aren't you doing this for me? Is that a reasonable thing for other NFL free agents that are out on the street right now and don't have a team to be asking themselves, hey, why aren't you doing this for me?
Well, this situation is I guess this situation, you can look at this situation, I guess, kind of differently. I think this is a situation where the NFL may have a guilt trip going on with the whole Colin Kaepernick
this could be
situation.
an NFL PR move.
So it could be a PR move.
But you'd agree with me, if you're a free agent out there and you've played 2 or 3 games this season or whatever the case is, and you're not in the league, you're out there looking for a job, and I'm asking myself if I'm in the – I've obviously paid my dues if I've been in the league at any point. In the players' union, I've paid my dues. Why are you guys doing this for him? I mean, I get it standing back, not being an NFL player, not looking for a job. I can look at and go, okay, I kind of get this, but this is really unprecedented to throw a open tryout like this for an ex-player who's not even on a roster and we're going to specialize it only for him, and all 32 teams are invited. Now, some of the teams that said they were going to be there are New England, the Giants, Tampa Bay, Dallas for some reason. I thought they were in love with Dak, but again, he could be a backup position, and maybe you just want to go see what's out there. But there were about 12 teams that expressed interest that they're going to go and check this out. It just comes off very freak to me because the NFL's never done anything like this, nor is any other sport that I know of, to throw an open day for one free agent. And like I said, if I'm a free agent and I'm out on the street looking for a job, I'm pissed. I'm like, why aren't you doing this for me?
Well, if I'm a free agent, first off, especially if I'm a wide receiver, hey, let me sign up, let me catch passes from Colin.
Right.
So I can show off my talent. If I'm a DB,
Right.
hey, let me go out here and play a little bit of defense on this wide receiver to show off my talent. I'm doing something to kind of work my way in there because, again,
Exposure.
You have the exposure. It's a major exposure. I mean, with these 12 teams. And also you have that person who really the main focus is going to be on Colin. You know, can Colin make these throws?
Right. So if I'm a GM and I'm sending people there, and I'm going to guess some GMs are actually going to be there because this is a big decision. The first thing I'm asking myself is he in shape? I want to see how his arm looks. Can he run? I'm going to get him on a treadmill and check out his cardio. And then I want to get in his head. Is he going to be a problem with all the, doing Nike commercials that are controversial? I don't need that on my team. I don't want that. Are you going to be a good guy in the locker room? Or are you going to come up and stir it up and be talking about what the NFL did to you? And, I mean, again, I don't want that. I got a lot of questions where's your mentality at? Do you have that killer instinct? Because in the NFL it stands for not for long if you're not making wins. So I want somebody that's going to come in here and be purely focused on loving football, loving playing, and loving getting wins. That's what the NFL is about. So I want to check those things out first. Those are the major things as a GM that are on my mind.
But even when you go back and look at the history with Colin Kaepernick, he's always been a team guy. You've really never, outside of the whole social, taking a knee, you've never really had issues with Colin Kaepernick in the locker room. So I don't think him being in the locker room is not going to be an issue.
I want to get in his head. And so I want to see where his head is at.
I mean, look. I mean, you still have these players who have some of the same doing some of the same social things that Colin has done. I mean, really, when you look at what Colin has done as far as his social commentary, or social work that he's done. So pretty much he's put his money where his mouth is.
Yeah, he's a very positive guy in his community. He's donating money.
He's not only has he donated money. I mean, he sent a plane to Africa with food.
Okay.
I mean, for his birthday, for his birthday just recently.
Those are all great things. But as a GM, I've got to be focused on how is this going to affect my team? I'm guessing those GMs that are going to ask, how is this going to affect my ticket base or my fan base? What are they going to think about that? But they're not signing the check. It ultimately comes down to me, but that's something I'm going to be thinking about. And two, I want to know where his head is at. Like, is he focused on winning a Super Bowl? All the other PR stuff, negative or positive, I'm not really worried about that. That's off the field stuff, and I don't want him bringing any more of like tumultuous issues into the locker room. Now, when he was with the 49ers, he didn't do that. I didn't see him doing that besides the whole starting the kneel down thing, which I'm so lost on what that even means at this point anymore because so many different social commentaries have gotten behind it that I've forgotten what the original thing was. But I want to know what's in his head. How much passion do you have to play the game, which is reasonable for any NFL player? Do you want to win a Super Bowl? Do you still love the game? Then I need to know if he's in shape. If he's in shape and he loves the game, he's going to love being a Carolina Panther or love the team that I represent as a GM, then I'm going to give serious consideration to hiring this guy because if his talent is still there, he was good enough when he left the league before in 2016, I thought, to be on a roster. He deserved a roster spot or a shot to work out.
Well, just to go back and look at those stats for that season before he was, what that situation was since he's been out of the league. On a bad San Francisco team with basically no receivers, no help running the ball, he threw 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Mm-hmm. And that's on a bad San Francisco team with no offensive line, basically hardly any decent wide receivers, tight ends, or running backs. So the fact that he threw 16 touchdowns and only 4 interceptions shows that he can still play in the league and he can still play at a competitive.
Chris, that was 3 years ago.
He can still play at a competitive rate.
If he can still do that, I want him on my team.
Yes, and so
I need to know what's going on up here.
I think
skill-wise, cardio-wise, running ability, throws, do it a physical. I need to know all that stuff because that's what's pertinent. What he thinks about Nike or the social issues, I'm not really worried about. I want to know if he's going to win me games.
Well, Colin he's a student of the game. I mean, from what I've seen, I've seen tapes of him still working out, still practicing. You had the big highlight tape with him actually working out with OBJ in the offseason. So he's still practicing. He's still working on making sure his mechanics is good. He's still waking up 5 o'clock in the morning doing whatever cardio or running or whatever he does. He still works out in the gym. So as far as the physical conditioning, I think he's fine as far as physical conditioning goes.
I think he's
going to have to get into football shape, and you can't really get into football shape until you hit superstar practice.
You got to put the pads on and hit somebody. So I'm very, very interested to see how this workout translates into, is he NFL ready? I'm really interested to see the reports and teams that would be interested. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking Chicago, Indianapolis Colts, Cincinnati, Los Angeles Chargers. Rivers isn't getting any younger, and they brought in Dwayne Haskins at the beginning of the year, cut him before the season started. So I don't know what the backup plan is in LA, and I can't even believe I'm still saying LA. But the LA Chargers could be an option. Now, maybe it's just a good move that Dallas, Atlanta, because Atlanta, you're thinking he's got Matt Schaub there as a backup, and they've got Matty Ice. But there's other teams. New England, obviously, Jared Stidham looks like the heir apparent in New England.
Right.
So, but I think maybe you exhaust all efforts and you want to just know and go out there and see what he's doing. And that's why other teams are interested besides the usual suspects. But there's also talk this week about Cam Newton, who is still on the payroll on the roster of the Carolina Panthers. Now he's coming out and saying he has interest in going to the Bears. And before, it was just the suits up in the upper suites and the GM that was talking about that. I think the Bears have to start making a move to move on from Mitchell Trubisky. Whether Colin Kaepernick is that or not will be better answered after this workout. But I could see Chicago. I could see Indianapolis. Brian Hoyer is backing up Jacoby Brissett, who just got hurt.
Right.
So that might be a move. Cincinnati needs a quarterback, among other things.
Right.
That seems like a good fit. And the Bolts. Who else would you say would be a good fit for Colin Kaepernick right now?
Oh, for Colin Kaepernick right now with the type of offense that he runs.
I've got one for you.
Who?
What about Arizona? Having him back up Kyler Murray and help him. That's the kind of offense that he likes. He's a dual threat guy. Kyler's a dual threat guy. I don't know who their backup is, but if Kyler goes down, you don't miss a whole lot if you bring in Colin Kaepernick. That seems like a win-win.
But that in a sense is a situation I don't think Colin would like to find himself in. Especially you're trying to work your way back into the league, but you don't necessarily want to go in to train someone else. You felt like,
but he's one play away from being down.
When you were out of the team, when you were left, you had your own team in a sense. So to go to Arizona, train a Kyler Murray, who's he's going to get the starter position anyway. You're not going to get that chance to actually play or play the game that you really love.
Like I said, he's one hit away from being injured, and then you're a starting quarterback right there. I think that's a low-pressure, good way to get your toe back into the league and dip your toe in the water. You don't want to jump in head first. You don't want him to go to a team. Let's say Matthew Stafford goes down. You send him to the Lions. You really want to work with that? I think it's a better situation where you go in and it's a low-pressure thing, and maybe you come in at the end of games when the game is blown out, and you start working your way back in. And I think that's a good way to just gently push the door open and step into the room instead of diving headfirst right through the locked door. Yeah. Another rumor that's out there is Gronkowski. I know. This one is, from New England. Now, owner Robert Kraft came out this week and said, "We'd love to see Gronk return in November to help us with our playoff push."
Right.
And that started the ball rolling again. And there's been 5 or 6 instances of this. What really got me is Tom Brady's quote about it. Did you see his quote?
No.
He came out, they asked him about it, and he said, this is a quote, "I'm really good friends with Gronk. We had a great relationship for over 10 years. And then he was pressed on about, so can you see him coming back? And he said, "Just for the record, I don't know. Those aren't conversations I'm privy to."
Right.
Now, I'm calling garbage on that right now, even though I'm a New England fan. You just got done telling me that you've been great friends with the guy for 10 years. And now you're saying in your next sentence, those aren't conversations or information that you're privy to. You got to tell me that you have no idea what's going on with Gronk when you were with him for 10 years, and he's a great friend of yours. He was a teammate of yours. Those are some of the tightest bonds in all of sports. And you don't know what's going on. That's not a conversation you're privy to. I mean, as much as I love the Patriots, you got to call things the way they are. And I'm calling garbage on that one. I think he knows.
Of course. I mean, you know the Patriots. First off, they're going to play coy about the situation. They're not going to disclose the situation at all if he was to come back. And then again, too, those conversations, if you listen to Gronk, he's pretty close with his family. So it may be a case in point where that's a situation that Gronk, had that conversation with his dad, with his mom and his dad about that situation.
Yeah, that might be the case, but what I don't understand and I don't like about it is that Tom Brady is trying to play coy. And look, if you don't want to give the answer, you could just come out and say, "Hey, look, I don't want to make a comment on that. He's retired. He's his own man. Would love to have him back, but you're going to have to go to him for a quote." Saying that you aren't privy to those conversations, that's ridiculous. I mean, he's got him on speed dial at one of the top 4, in his phone. Right. I think he knows. And look, as a fan, I'd love to see him come back, but he has had so much rhetoric since he's retired this year about getting into other things, whether it's CBD oil or acting. Right. I don't know what kind of shape he's in. It looks like he's lost a lot of weight. Right. Now I'm at the point where I can't see a scenario where he comes back.
Well, no. I mean, he's moving into his Peyton Manning and Shaq zone selling things right now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so, no. I at the beginning of the season, I thought I could see Gronk coming back.
Right.
But, as he progressed, as he began to talk and say things about the concussions and all this other stuff, it began to kind of make me think that he's really done now.
Yeah, I think he's really done. Moving on to bigger and better things, namely college football, because it is the season. And we're getting down to the rivalry games. We're getting down to must-wins. And every game in college football is a must-win. But again, a loss in week 1, you're still in the playoff.
Right.
Even if it's a terrible loss. I was just about to get off on Kentucky losing to Evansville yesterday in college basketball. It's talking about a terrible loss. But the college football rankings came out for the playoff this week. LSU won, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, Bama, Oregon, Utah, Minnesota, and Penn State. And rounding out the top 10 is Oklahoma, who has a big game on the road at Baylor this week. And so you and I had a semi-less than civil conversation a couple days ago about where our top 4 would be. So just for my record, I've got LSU at 1, Ohio State 2, Clemson at 3, and I've got Bama by a frog's hair at 4 over Georgia. Now, the reason that I've got that, and we've discussed this, is Alabama's body of work and scheduling isn't that strong. So I'll give you that. On the other side, they make these schedules 4 and 5 years in advance, and that's not their fault that they don't have a strong schedule right now. They could have scheduled somebody stronger, yes, but you have to play. Many of the guys that are on the team now had nothing to do with this schedule being made. So they've been dominant against the teams that they had to beat or play. They lost at home by 5 to the number 1 team in the country. That's going to be my argument. My argument against Georgia is, yes, they beat Notre Dame, who I think isn't even a top 20 team. If they are, they're 18 to 22, somewhere in that range. You would agree they're not even a top 10 or 15 team.
Not a top 10 team, no.
And they beat a Florida team that I would put at somewhere between 9 and 12 right now. So those are 2 good wins. But their loss and this is what I think the committee was going to look at, is their loss was at home to a South Carolina team that's not even in the top 50. So you both have home losses, but Alabama loses at home to the number 1 team in the country by 4, and Georgia loses at home to a team that isn't even in the top 50 by 3 in overtime. Having said that, I will give the floor to you, but my top 4, LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, Bama, Georgia, Oregon.
Okay. And, my top 4 was LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, and Georgia. And, my point was simply made because, they did have a better strength of schedule. Right. But when you look at that, Georgia has a better strength of schedule. But even though that game ended up close in Alabama, they only would, end up losing by 1 score.
Right.
If you look at that game, really, they were down 20 points at home, and they're supposed to be the favorite.
Right.
Even though they came back, that still you have a 20-point gap right here in this game.
Right.
And so if I'm the committee, if I'm looking at this, I'm looking at basically these teams are really, when you look at them, they're almost really equal to each other.
Right. It's a razor-thin margin.
Right. So you're looking at these teams, both of them are really equal to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at the fact that LSU stretched to a 20-point lead. And then really when you look at that game at the end, when LSU needed to score, they scored. Really, it's like LSU almost in a sense, kind of took their foot off the pedal in the Alabama game.
Yeah,
so
there was no defense in that game at all.
Right. So
no defense.
So really, if you're looking at it like I'm looking at it, LSU could have took that lead higher, could have stretched that lead out even more against Alabama, which is something that's unheard of against an Alabama team. So even though, yes, that game came back to be close,
right?
Again, that's because LSU, in a sense, took their foot off the pedal.
So I never look at, well, they were down by, it only matters what the final score is, because everything that happens on the field from the minute it gets kicked off to the last tick on the clock is what we measure teams by. If there was a fight after the game or comments made after the game, it doesn't change the rankings. The only thing that matters is what actually happened on the field. So you would agree that, let's just say Florida or Penn State is one of the top teams in the country. You would agree with me there?
Yeah.
Okay. But they clearly don't belong in that top 4 or 5 teams in the country. They would be closer to 10 than they would 1.
Right.
Okay. So I think LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, and Bama, and I might be willing to put Oregon in there. Right. I might be. They're on the fringe, but those are obvious teams that are in their own stratosphere. So if we're going to have a discussion about, who should be at 4 or 5, I think it's really splitting hairs between Alabama and Georgia. There's just something with Georgia, and I think we're going to find out a lot this weekend because they have to go on the road to a team with a really good defense. There's just something about Georgia that it's just not completely passing my eye test to get in the playoffs. Now, that's just an objective thing. It's totally subjective. It's just an opinion. Then we get into the Utah, Minnesota, Penn State, Oklahoma, possibly Florida, but they're on the outside fringe. But again, to me, it's a very clear 5 teams, and I might consider putting Oregon on the fringe of like reaching up to touch the bottom of either Georgia or Alabama. But definitely there's 5 teams in there. That's what makes the Georgia at Auburn game so interesting to me.
Right.
And then Bama. Bama has Mississippi State, Western Carolina, and has to play Auburn at Auburn, which I think is a great measuring stick because this week Georgia plays at Auburn.
Right.
So if they fall on their heels a little bit or lose that game, well, then all this discussion goes away.
Right.
Because, unless Auburn beats Bama too, right. And then we need to start talking about it, whether Auburn needs to be up there or not. But I don't see that happening. Ohio State at 2. They have at Rutgers, PSU, and Michigan. Right. Penn State and Michigan. If you look at their schedule, this is the only thing that bothers me about Ohio State, and I've been high on Ohio State. I think they should be in that top 4, whether it's 1 or 4, really doesn't matter. You're in, you're in.
Right.
These are the teams that they've beat. This is what bothers me. If anything could bother me about their program, they beat Maryland, not a very good team, terrible team. Northwestern, worst offense in the Big Ten. Michigan State, they're an absolute dumpster fire. They're sitting around wondering right now if they made the right move on Scott Frost.
Right.
So they're ridiculous. Miami of Ohio. So the strength of schedule numbers are starting to plummet. FAU, nothing, terrible. Indiana, a C to C minus team at best. The best teams that they've played and beaten are Cincinnati and Wisconsin. Cincinnati's a 15 to 20 team. I'd put Wisconsin at 12 to 15. So that strength of schedule, it's easy to look at and go, wow, they're blowing everybody out. But it's like, well, who have you really beat? You beat Wisconsin, full credit, in a rain game at home. Okay, that's fine. You got a really monster win there. And then your next biggest win is against Cincinnati. Yeah. Again, at home.
Right.
So that's my only critique of Ohio State. Again, do I think that they deserve to be in the top 4? Absolutely. They deserve to be there. But I would start edging them more towards 4 than 2 or 3 or 1. LSU's got to be 1. And they've got, this is why I'm talking about their schedule coming up. They have a free spot on the bingo board this week at Rutgers. They'll win that game, no problem.
Right.
Then they've got Penn State at home at the Shoe. Mm-hmm. Then they go on the road to Michigan. And for some reason, Chris, for as critical as I've been about Michigan this year, I think that game is going to be closer than what Vegas might say. Because right now, Vegas has that as a 13.5-point line.
Right.
Michigan getting the 13.5. That might be one of my pre-week teaser specials because I think Michigan, this is it for Harbaugh. The whole season isn't lost. You win that game, all the talk about, bipolarness, not having teams ready, you're getting blown out by Wisconsin, all that stuff goes away if you beat Ohio State. Even if it's a 1-point victory, you beat what some people think is the number 2 team in the country, obviously.
Right.
That's a big, big deal. How do you see the top 4 playing out?
The top 4, I see LSU. They're going undefeated to the SEC championship.
Right.
I see. Basically, that's what I see.
And probably playing Georgia.
And playing Georgia. I don't see Georgia losing again until they get to the SEC championship.
So what about the game at Auburn this week? Auburn's getting 3 points.
I think with Georgia, looking at the game, look how they basically shut out Missouri last week.
Right. You'd agree Missouri and Auburn are in different stratospheres.
Different leagues, but I think Georgia's defense it will have enough to put enough pressure on Bo Nix.
Right.
Low-scoring game. That it's going to be a low-scoring game. You have to look at their stable of backs. I mean, yes, Auburn has a great front 4. Great front 4, but Georgia's main strength is pounding the ball. Eventually, time of possession is going to be critical.
Start
exactly.
Right, but I just think, and this is just an opinion, I just think this game is going to be closer than people think. I mean, it's only a 3-point line, and for some reason, being at home, Gus Malzahn is an experienced coach. Auburn is a top 15 team, I think.
Yeah.
I think if you take all those mistakes out of the Florida game, which is a huge if, you just can't do that. But if you take those mistakes out, they're a super, super solid team. And something about this, if I'm going to tease it, I take Auburn plus the 9 points. I think that's just too many points. And I know Georgia's good, but freak things happen, and it's a road game in the SEC. Yeah. And there's never a free spot on the bingo board, especially in the West with the SEC.
Yeah, it's a road game. When it comes down to quarterback play, I'm going to take my chances with Jake Fromm simply because he's experienced. He's experienced in big games.
At Notre Dame.
At Notre Dame.
Right.
I mean, even if you go back to
last year, the college football playoff.
Exactly. So you go back and look at those. Go back to the college football playoff where they played Georgia. I mean, this guy played as a true freshman, and he almost won that game against a tough, top-ranked Alabama defense. So I'm going to go with the experience of Jake Fromm over Bo Nix.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Simply because of that.
Do you see a close game like
it's going to be a close game?
I think it's going to be a close game. And I think there's going to be more incentive, and I think it's going to be a bigger factor that it's at Auburn because I think Jordan-Hare is going to be going crazy. Right. I think that the fans they're like, this is a winnable game. I think the team believes it's winnable. I think the fans and that momentum of home field advantage there, I think it's going to mean more than average. Minnesota comes off a big win against Penn State, goes on the road to Iowa. Iowa's given 3 points. Somebody needs to talk to me. I mean, is every bookmaker out in Vegas on cocaine right now?
I think that.
How do they come up with these lines?
I don't know. I mean, you look at that Minnesota team last week. You know, they were going against Penn State. Penn State has all the experience. They have the running backs, and you have a quarterback that threw for 90% passing percentage against Penn State's defense.
Right.
So when you're looking at that as just the way that offense runs, I mean, they can run the ball. It showed you they can pass the ball. Defense, I mean, they're solid on defense.
Yeah, 12th in the country right now in overall defense. So is this a case where Vegas is saying, you guys had that euphoric high, you got married, and now it's a week later, and you don't have that same intensity? Is that what this could be? A lack of intensity call?
I think this is, for Vegas, you got to prove it to me. Mm-hmm. And again, week in and week out, so far this season, they've gone out and they've proven that we are the better team.
Yeah, last week, that you want to talk about a game that wasn't even as close as the score indicated.
Yeah.
Three times Penn State threw interceptions in Minnesota's red zone. That's possibly 21 points coming off the board right there.
Right.
And so I don't think that that game was as close as the score indicated. And I'm probably out of my mind, but I'm taking Minnesota plus the 3 in this game. Yeah. I know it's a road game, but Iowa can't score. Their offense is not that good.
Right.
And I think it's going to be a close game. Very close game. 3 points could be the difference in the game, but I think it's going to be close, and I'm taking Minnesota in this one.
Yeah, I think Minnesota's they're going to ride the victory on this. They're going to roll their way to a victory on this one.
I hope you're right, because I'm going to put some money on that one. Number 9, Oklahoma, and the biggest game of the week goes on the road to 9-0 Baylor. At the beginning of the season, like, how much drugs would I have to be on to get to the point where I actually say I could see Baylor going 9-0, but that's where we're at.
Right.
And Minnesota's undefeated too. Baylor's getting 10 points. Now, this is what is freaking me out about this game. We know Oklahoma actually has a defense that's ranked in the top. I think they're 42nd in the country. It's not absolutely terrible.
Right.
But in their last 2 games, they gave up 48 points to Kansas State and 41 to Iowa State, who aren't known as offensive juggernauts. So that concerns me. The other thing that concerns me is Baylor. They're ranked 25th in the country in overall offense and 31st in the country in overall defense. So that tells me they're in the top 3rd bracket defensively and offensively. I like what Rule has done down there, taking over an absolute dumpster fire and somehow being able to recruit talent. I didn't like their game 2 weeks ago at home against West Virginia. They looked mediocre at best. And then last week they had all kinds of hell against TCU and had to go into triple overtime to get a win against a OK C+ TCU team. But sometimes as a championship team, you got to win close games against subpar competition. I'm just liking Baylor plus the 10, and this is my teaser pick of the week. I'm taking Baylor on a teaser plus 16 points at home, college game day, prime time. Give me the 16 points against a defense that is not that great.
Yeah, I actually like Baylor in this game, and what I
Baylor
like
to win or Baylor to cover?
I actually like Baylor to win this game. To be honest with you,
wow.
When I look at this Baylor team, they show that they can play. They could play that game where it's really, really close, or they could play that game where it's wide open.
Yeah. So
they can play both sides. But what I love about Baylor and their defense is they will walk up and they will pop you. Mm-hmm. And I think with them playing Oklahoma, yeah, they played some defense, but I don't know if they play their defense that's going to walk up and just smack you if you catch that ball. And I think that physicality. Again, it wears on a team that's wide open, that's spread like Oklahoma, and I think that's something that's going to come into play.
I'm going to take Oklahoma for the win, but I'm taking Baylor, my teaser special of the week, plus 16 points at home. I think the crowd's going to be in it. That might keep them close. I'm having a hard time, actually. My concern with Baylor is scoring against Oklahoma, and I can't actually believe I'm saying that, but Oklahoma defensively hasn't been as terrible as we might think, just because of the last 2 weeks. They've given up a tremendous amount of points, especially the K-State game. They looked unmotivated, not ready to play, didn't want to tackle. Terrible penalties were being called, especially in the second half of that game. I think that their defense semi-bounces back enough to get the win at Baylor. I think that's going to be a big-time, interesting game. Another game that I'm interested in is Wake Forest going on the road to Clemson, getting 34.5 points. I think Wake Forest is a semi-solid team. I would put them in that C plus range, C to C plus range. I think they do enough, just enough to keep it within the margins. I'm liking Wake plus the 34.5.
I'm gonna give you something to make you may want to change your mind.
Okay.
Well, Wake's number one receiver.
Mm-hmm.
He's done for the season.
Yeah, I heard about that this week. You're right.
And so, basically, this guy takes the top off the defense. He's their best route runner, and I think Clemson is on a mission to prove everybody wrong for putting them out of the first week in the playoffs. So,
right.
Yes, I'm
but
thinking.
How much do you think Dabo really gets caught up in stuff like that? Like, he doesn't come off to me, Dabo Swinney, the head coach at Clemson. He doesn't come off to me like a coach that's worried about passing the eye test. I think his whole thing is, let's just win this week.
Yeah, I mean, he may not come out like that publicly, but I'm pretty sure behind closed doors, when he's talking to his players, hey, it's time for business, fellas. It's time to stop playing around. Let's go out and handle business and show that we are the champions.
I agree with that. I think it's going to be interesting, and I hate using that word so much, but I don't know. I think that Wake has had a better than average season. I don't think that Clemson cares about blowing people out and covering the spread. And I just think that Wake is it's like BC last year. Played Clemson on the road at Clemson tough. And I think that Wake is going to have just enough there offensively, maybe a couple stops on defense. A turnover goes their way. And I just like the 34 points. That it just seems like too many points at home. And I know Clemson's offense can just turn it on at any point. But, we'll see how it turns out. I think it's a less than stellar lineup this week in college football, even though there are games of interest that I like. That's only one of them because I think I'm just interested in if Wake can keep it within 35 points or not.
Right.
But it's not a game where I think it's going to be that highly entertaining. Navy at Notre Dame, if Navy can show up and get their running game going and they have any kind of defense at all, I think that's going to be a close game. I think Notre Dame's lucky this year that they're playing that game at home.
Right.
But we'll see. I want to get to our top 5 list this week. And the subject for our top 5 list is the top 5 coaches of all time in any sport. Chris has got his top 5. We haven't compared notes. I don't have any idea who's on your list. But for me, number 5, I'm going to start with Bud Wilkinson. Okay. Have you ever heard of him?
Nope.
Well, this is good. He was the head coach at Oklahoma for quite a long time. At least, I think it was about 11 years. In his first 10 years at Oklahoma, Bud Wilkinson's record was 107, 8 losses, and 2 ties. He was there as the coach from 47 to 63. He won 8 it was back then it was Big 8 championships. He won 14 of them.
Right.
Including every single year from 47 to 59. They won their conference. That's pretty impressive. Then they came back after they won it in 59. They missed in 60s and 61, and they won it again in 62. So they won their conference under him 14 times. That's pretty amazing. 3 national championships. And one thing I look at when I'm looking at a coach, especially in college football, is how do you do in bowl games? Because bowl games are like playoff games. He only went 6-2. Wow. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So out of my top 5 coaches of all time, I went way off the board. A lot of our young listeners are going to be like Googling Bud Wilkinson right now. But he was an amazing guy. He had an amazing 10-year stretch. He's at number 5 for me.
My number 5, I'm going to go with Newt Rockne from Notre Dame. I'm looking at his record. He was 105-12, which is really, really good. He won 3
That's amazing.
Exactly. He won 3 national championships at Notre Dame, and to me that shows that even though they wasn't playing that many games, the fact that you went, you have a win percentage that good, that's amazing to me.
All right, Newt Rockne's your number 5. My number 4. Now, this one is a razor thin between 2 guys. And I'm going to tell you why I went with the guy I went with. I went with, at number 4, greatest coaches of all time, Urban Meyer.
Really?
I did. But I know what a lot of listeners and watchers and viewers might be thinking right now is, well, what about Nick Saban? He's got more national championships, which is fine. It's a razor thin. It's not like I'm saying Urban Meyer blew him away. Razor thin margin. Here's the thing about Urban Meyer. His overall record is 187-32. That just by itself is impressive in college football today because you have so many huge teams. It's not like, for instance, back in the 30s when you had Navy, Army, Notre Dame, and maybe one other team that was big. You got a lot of teams out there, so it's super, super competitive. Here's this bowl record. In 15 bowl games, he's 12-3.
Wow.
That's pretty amazing. 3 national championships. But this is why I think he beats out Nick Saban by a hair. He's won 3 Big Ten championships, 2 SEC championships, and 2 Mountain West championships. In 2009, Sports Illustrated named him the coach of the decade. And besides that, before he was even at Utah, which was in the Mountain West at the time, he was 17-6 at Bowling Green in the MAC.
Right.
He had 2 winning record seasons. One was, 8-3, and the other one was 9-3. I can't remember exactly which one was which. I think that was it. His first season was 8-3. His next season was 9-3. So he turned around and built a program substantially in the MAC, in the Mountain West. He won the SEC. He won SEC championships and national championships. He won Big Ten championships and national championships. And he's the SI Coach of the Year for the decade in 2009. And he's 12-3 in bowl games. To me, he's done it. Now, you could say, well, Nick won at Alabama, but he also won at LSU, and he turned around Michigan State. Right, but go do it in the Mountain West and the MAC.
Right.
So that right there just gives that little tiny notch that says Urban Meyer is my number 4 coach of all time. Motivator, solid guy. I think he actually got way too much flack from Florida people when he left Florida, but he's my number 4 coach of all time.
My number 4 coach of all time, Bobby Bowden.
Wow.
Yeah, Bobby. He's way down the list. So, but really, you have to look at Bobby's record. He's won over 300 games.
Yeah. Turned around Florida State.
Turn around Florida State.
There was nothing before he got there.
He started as a wide receiver coach, came from West Virginia. Just his tenure at Florida State. If you go back and you look at those Florida States from those 80s and 90s, he basically had this thing running for almost 20 years straight. So you look at the dominance that he had over that tenure. You had 12 ACC championships, two national championships.
All the years where he finished like 10 years around the top
10, top 5, right?
Yeah, top 5.
Top 5, right? You look at, just even look at the players that came up under him that's going to the NFL that are Hall of Famers right now.
Yeah.
So when you look at that, I'm looking at Bobby Bowden. He's my number 4 coach.
When we did our top 5 college football traditions, you had Osceola putting the spear in at the 50-yard line as your number 1. And now you've got Bobby Bowden. Out of all the NBA, NFL, college football coaches, lacrosse, bowling, anything, you've got Bobby Bowden in your top 5. So you're not worried about people possibly smelling a little bit of homerism coming from you? There's no home because you went to FSU.
Not really when they see the rest of my coaches.
Bobby Bowden in the top 5, it's not even a little bit of a stretch?
No. You look at the history of what Bobby has done for college football, what he's done over his span of college football. It's no way he can't be somewhere in the top 5.
Okay, my number 3 all time. Now we're getting into like the really tight zone. This is the upper echelon of coaches that have ever coached anywhere, anytime, ever. Number 3 for me is the Wizard of Westwood, John Wooden.
That's a good one. The
head coach of the UCLA basketball program throughout the 60s mainly. Listen to these statistics in his resume. First of all, let's just start with one of the most stand-up guys ever to coach, one of the top character individuals ever in coaching. He was just above reproach.
Right.
So that I love. It's such a recruiting magnet to be able to say John Wooden is going to be your head coach because he's going to care about your players and developing them as athletes, but he's also equally, if not more so, going to care about your son or coming into UCLA as a human being and an individual and helping develop that part of him, his character. I told you I got to sit down with Bill Walton. I've got Bill Walton's book up here. And I got to sit down with him over the holidays out in California when I was there. And I was asking him about the most influential people, because he's come across everybody, Red Auerbach, Casey Jones,
Right.
I mean, tons of people. And there was a theme throughout the day about sharing stories and things that had to do with John Wooden.
Right.
And the stories that I noticed had nothing to do with statistics. They were all human connection stories about what a great character guy that this guy was. When his wife passed away, he was still writing love letters to her and taking them to where she's buried. He had an incredible marriage. He was an incredible man of character. But here's his professional resume as a coach. 10-time national championship in men's basketball. Right there, you're in the top 5.
Yeah.
10 times. 12 times he took UCLA basketball team to the Final Four. Now, how many coaches can say that? 12 appearances in the NCAA Final Four. Have you ever heard of the National Basketball League? It was here before the NBA. He played in that league, and in 1933, he was the scoring leader in the NBL, which is not a coaching thing, but I just think it's fascinating
Right.
that he was at the top of his game playing as a scoring leader in 1933 in the NBL. Say that fast. 5-time Coach of the Year.
Yeah.
5 times. That, to me, is stellar. 5-time Coach of the Year. I actually took one of the quotes that Bill shared with me, and it's probably on the internet too, but this is a John Wooden quote that really solidified the fact that he should be one of my top 5 coaches. Be more concerned with your character than your reputation. I thought that was amazing. Stand-up guy, 10 championships, 5-time Coach of the Year. John Wooden, number 3 for me, all-time coaches.
My number 3 is probably one of the greatest coaches that people have probably. If you follow college football, you know him. You know about his record. You know about what he's did for this institution, the institution of college football. My number 3 is Eddie Robinson.
Another solid character guy.
Right. Eddie Robinson was the coach of Grambling for over 40 years. He notched over 400 wins, and he also had 9 black college national championships. 9. And on top of that, he also won his conference 17 times. So
what's Grambling done since he left?
Well, they hired
They're not
Doug
Williams.
Doug Williams.
Right.
They kept the program relevant somewhat, but you haven't really heard of Grambling too much as far as on the national scene.
Right.
Since Eddie Robinson has left. But I mean, to me, he was one of the greatest college coaches. Well, to me personally, I mean, he is on the pantheon of being one of the greatest college coaches of all time.
I agree. I think he's not only one of the top coaches in college football of all time, he was a stand-up character guy.
Yeah.
And we need more of that in college athletics. We need more of that in the world, just in general. My number 2 all-time coach of all time is Red Auerbach from the Boston Celtics. Now, this is not a homer call because this guy is established. First of all, as a coach, he won 9 NBA championships, including 8 in a row. Mm-hmm. That's pretty amazing. He was 11 times he was named to be the all-star coach for the Eastern Conference. Here's the other things that a lot of people don't know about him that I respect about him a lot. He drafted the first black player in the NBA, Chuck Cooper, to play with the Celtics, but he also brought in Casey Jones, Sam Jones. He was integrating basketball at a time in the early 50s when baseball had just started that. He was the next tier of person. And in that town in Boston, a racially charged town, and then on top of that, not only did he do it first, and did he do it in such a hard town to do it in, but he did it and he won.
Yeah.
Here's the other thing. Not only did he do it as a coach, most of the years they were winning NBA titles, he was also the GM. So he's putting together the team and he's coaching the team. He's integrating the team, which I loved. He's also known in many NBA circles as the inventor of the fast break that started with Bob Cousy.
Right.
Little tiny short guy, and now what do we see? The same thing with Steve Nash. We see the same thing with Stephen Curry. You put a smaller guy at point and let him run that fast break. So he's known as the father of the fast break. While he was in any capacity with the Celtics, they won 16 championships.
Yep.
That's pretty amazing to me. He turned into the full-time GM in 1986 and has 938 wins all time. So he did it on a social level. He coached. He GM'd. He was an innovator, and he's at the top. As far as coaches goes, he has more he has more wins than anybody else. But their franchise, which he's the father of, has more championships now, 17, than any other team. And to win 8 in a row,
yeah.
I don't want to hear the stories about, well, back there in the NBA, they didn't have talent. Well, that's stupid because they actually had more talent, I think. You can't compare awesome players in the 60s to awesome players in 2010. It doesn't work. You got to compare the greatest players in their era at their position. Red Auerbach's my number 2 all-time coach ever, any sport.
My number 2, well, sticking with college football. Paul Bear Bryant from the University of Alabama.
Really? Now, did you consider Paul Brown at all? Was he in that? No?
I thought about him, but...
Do you have an NFL coach on your list?
Nope.
Oh, wow. This is going to be shocking to see who your number 1 is. So, Bear Bryant. How come Bear Bryant at 2?
Well, I look at Bear Bryant over his stretch. First off, he has 6 national championships.
Mm-hmm.
He started out. He won 6 national championships at Alabama in the SEC. He has the most SEC championships out of any coach ever. And just looking at his body of work in college football and what he's meant to college football, he put him up there as the top college football coach in history, outside of Eddie Robinson to me.
And what about Saban? Where would he be?
Saban's
got 6, right?
5.
5?
Yep.
Are you counting LSU?
Oh, right. That's right. He does have 6.
So he's got 6 in the SEC also.
He has 6 in the SEC.
But how close is Saban? Because back in I would say in the 60s and the 70s, you had machines. They were just factories. Now, in college football, it's so much harder to recruit.
Right.
You got to be electronically tied in. And for guys that are Bear Bryant's age or Nick Saban these days, to get tied in electronically and build those relationships in a completely different way, it's a lot more about keeping in track and keeping connected electronically than visiting the family in the house anymore, I think.
Right.
So how close do you have Nick Saban there? Because Nick wasn't even in your top 5.
Yeah, I know he wasn't in my top 5. I'm looking at the body of work over a history. When I look at Nick Saban has been doing it for probably maybe 20 years.
Yeah.
You got to look. Bear Bryant, Bobby Bowden, Eddie Robinson. These guys did it for 30, 40 years straight.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at that body of work over that span of time,
it's incredible.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And so that was the big difference in the knots with selecting Bear Bryant over Nick Saban.
Yeah, I'm not knocking that too hard. I just was wondering how far off it was. My number 1 coach of all time, any sport ever, is Bill Belichick.
Should have known.
It's Bill and it's not a homer call either. It's not a homer call. No. We're talking. First of all, everything he's done has to be prefaced by saying 95% of it was done in a free agent market.
Yeah.
So all the stuff that happened with Chuck Noll and Don Coryell and we could go back to Vince Lombardi and anybody who was winning in the 70s and in the 60s. It was a completely different playing field. It is much harder when you have a salary cap you have to work with.
Right. Then
you've got open free agency. And what he's done in the last 20 years, this is what he's done. He's been the head coach since 2000 at New England. But he was an assistant coach, defensive coordinator at several other places, and the head coach at the Browns, and almost had Cleveland turned around for the first time ever. He almost did. That team was really good. And Nick Saban was on that team. He was also one of his assistants. But 6-time Super Bowl champion as a head coach, 3-time coach of the year. That just doesn't happen in the NFL. And there's probably other years he could have been head coach, but that's a little bit of a he already has one. Let's give it to somebody who's an up-and-comer.
Right.
3-time coach of the year. He has 2 Super Bowl championships as a coordinator with the Giants. So he has 8 overall championships. His overall record in regular season is 300 and 135. That's almost a 700 winning percentage over 20 years in free agency and a salary cap. He's winning almost 70% of his games in over 20 years in the pros, the highest possible echelon of athletics. His postseason record is 31 and 11. Again, in the playoffs over 20 years, he's almost hitting at a 700% clip in the playoffs. They've won 10 divisional championships in a row. 10. Teams don't get all geared up because they're playing against Tom Brady next week. They're thinking to themselves, the Patriots had a week off. What's Bill Belichick doing with 2 weeks that's going to take me apart? They're not thinking in the Super Bowl, how's Tom Brady going to take me apart? Nobody saw Edelman coming out having all those receptions last year in the Super Bowl against the Rams. And every Super Bowl, you just plug in a different player. The constant is the coaching. The constant is Bill Belichick. And the real fear with the GMs and the coaches on the other side is, how is he going to scheme and take away what we do best? And even though they know it's going to happen and they know what his methods are and his techniques, it happens every single year. So Bill Belichick is my number 1 coach of all time.
Well, I mean, you've already said my number 1 coach, so.
I did?
Yeah.
Oh. We actually have one on the list that's the same?
John Wooden.
John Wooden, there you go, yeah.
So there we go. That's it.
Yeah, John Wooden.
Yeah, I mean, you've already discussed him, so I mean, I have nothing else to say.
I know. We don't talk about the list, so we try not to. So we're totally objective. Now, I thought Bowden was a little bit of a stretch for top 5 all time, and Bear Bryant, because there's a lot of people that you could plug in at college football. And, you know, I'll even willing to admit Bud Wilkerson is a little bit of a stretch, because there's just so many guys out there that are great. I could have unplugged him and plugged in Saban.
Right.
And I could have built an argument for that. One thing about the Red Auerbach integrating and the Eddie Robinson stuff that you had, which I thought was great, is I watched that show Hidden Figures. Have you ever seen that movie?
Yes.
Hidden Figures.
Yes.
It really opened my eyes. Like, sometimes we have thoughts, opinions, and in the back of our head that are real for us, that we have a solid thought about it.
Right.
But then when you, like, homelessness. When I was working at UF, I actually went down and worked at St. Francis House. Mm-hmm. And then I'm actually serving the food. I'm actually getting up at 5 in the morning to make sure that they have breakfast. I'm seeing the people's eyes. Okay. I'm seeing them as they come through. I'm talking to them afterwards. And it's more of a real experience.
Right.
And this is a total social thing, not a sports thing. But when I saw that movie, I think about 2 weeks ago for the first time, and I just thought it was a movie about NASA and some women that were working at NASA.
Right.
It really opened my eyes socially to what African Americans went through in the 50s, 40s, 30s, 60s, and the inequality that was out there. Because growing up in the era that I have and growing up in San Diego, I honestly have to say I have no idea. I have very little idea of what people in that era and people of color went through, not just in the South, but nationwide, to have to walk. You know, like that lady had to walk a mile and a half to go use another bathroom. And you just look at that stuff today, and I'll admit I take stuff like that for granted. Right. And I say, after seeing it, I say, you know, I have no idea what that's like. I've never faced that. In my whole lifetime, I've probably been faced with maybe 5 comments about race towards me.
Right.
To be completely immersed into a society that does not like you or does not accept you or makes it very hard for you to move up. You could be one of the smartest people at your position and still be held back for years just because of the color of your skin. And again, you know, this is a sports talk show, but I think it's important to talk about these issues sometimes because it's a real part of life. And that's what makes sports so interesting, is it's real. Yeah. Reality TV isn't real. What these women and so many other people went through was real.
Yeah.
And even though I can't understand it, it doesn't make it less valid. And watching a movie like Hidden Figures, and this isn't a promo for Hidden Figures, but watching a movie like that, it helped me to get a little closer in contact with what people can do to other human beings. And this was accepted. This was a natural way of life to hold people back and have a segregated society. And it happened in Germany, and it's been happening all over the world, but it hits more home to you and I because we grew up here and it happened here. It's just unbelievable. It's hard for me to think, like, how could, in today's day, how can you live like that back then? And so then I correlate that to Red Auerbach on a smaller scale. Like, that was a pretty gutsy thing to do, especially in a racially charged town like Boston. But it's even more of a thing when you think about what Eddie Robinson did. And it's too easy to say, well, he was at a traditionally black school. So what?
Right.
Guys don't get coaching jobs and succeed in the 60s, 70s, and 80s as an African American in college football.
Right.
There's so many things working against you that I don't understand because I'm not an African American. And I love the fact that whoever put this show and directed it, wrote it, screenplayed it, gave the okay on it, I give you guys a thumbs up, and I subscribe to your channel because that story is filled with guts and reality and talking about where we really were. And I pray that we never go back to that place ever again, that we only keep moving in a direction that brings everybody into a focus that it doesn't matter where you grew up. It doesn't matter what religion you were born into. It doesn't matter what color your skin is because we don't have control over any of those things. When we start getting closer to the point where we understand that everybody on this planet is a human being, then we start becoming greater people. People that grow up in Russia are naturally communist because they grew up there. Or I think about growing up in Nepal, I would have probably ended up as a Nepalese monk. But that's just because I grew up there. Acceptance globally and realizing that every single human being has the same value and we treat everyone with dignity and respect and they're just another pilgrim on this planet trying to find their way, I think we come closer to a more utopian, harmony-filled, peace-filled, understanding-filled place on this planet. I just thought that was an awesome movie. Total side note, but...
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of takes me back to listening to my great-grandfather and, even my grandfather talk to me about the quote-unquote hidden games that were played in back in those times, back in the early 1900s, where you had these historically black institutions playing against these white colleges like Florida or, I can say Florida because Florida is the oldest school in the state of Florida. So you had these institutions actually playing against these teams, and you actually had these black college teams actually beating these teams. And, just to go back and know that, even though they had these segregated situations, where, you had different institutions that didn't have all the resources that certain schools had, or certain
forces trying to sabotage them and keep them down. Yeah.
So the fact that you had these type of games that were being played, and to know the history, and to have them say how these institutions were able to beat their counterparts, and for them to have pride because they were like, okay, that brought us so much pride, knowing that even though they think of us as less, we're able to compete and actually show them that, we are just as equal or just as good as you are.
Yeah.
So, just to actually know that type of history, to have that history, and just with sports, just in sports itself.
Yeah.
It goes a lot to show that, nobody's better than the other person.
No.
So.
And love brings people together.
Yeah.
You got to teach kids to hate other people. And that could go either way. I mean, it can go from, Irish, Chinese, Middle Eastern. I'm sure there's people in this country that don't like Middle Eastern people in general, just because of the wars that we've had. But you got to understand, it's a couple people that you have to have an opinion about their character and the decisions they've made, and we can't generalize things.
Right.
And I've done that in the past. I've been in that category of generalizing things. Let's put a bow on the show. What do you say?
Let's go ahead.
Okay. Usually at this point, I would kick it to you and say other things going on in the world of sports, but I've actually got a couple stories myself. Hall of Fame catcher Mike Piazza, formerly of the Mets and the Dodgers, assigned to be the manager of the Italian National League. That's kind of a story. I never would have seen that coming, but that was an interesting story that I came out of Major League Baseball. And the other thing out of Major League Baseball is the huge scandal now going on with the Houston Astros. Mike Fiers, who was the pitching coach there, has now moved on since then. But in 2017, he was there. And he said, hey, we were stealing signs using cameras. Now, in Major League Baseball, stealing signs is an acceptable, known. No one says anything about it. If I've got a guy on second, he's going to try and do this. Is not an illegal act.
Right.
When you mount cameras and you start using electronics, it starts getting into a deceptive area that I don't even like and is highly illegal. So that came out now. I'm going to be very interested to see how that works out and what kind of punitive damages MLB hands down. And if it was even happening. Let's figure out what was happening first. But if that was happening, that's a pretty big thing for me. What else is going on in the world of sports, Chris?
Well, we had Charles Rogers who just passed recently this week. He died from cancer. I mean, if you know Charles Rogers was a standout wide receiver at Michigan State, who went on to play in the NFL with the Detroit Lions. And so it's sad to see that, you know, he passed from cancer, and, you know, it's a situation where 38 years old. He was young. I mean,
yeah. And he had kidney failure. I actually got to meet him at a kind of like all the guys that were coming out of college. Rex Grossman was there. Taylor Jacobs was there. Ken Dorsey was there out in San Diego. And it was like a meet the young new players in the NFL for the military guys. And my dad was a military guy. My mom served militarily. And so I actually got to meet him. And I didn't have some in-depth conversation with him. This is 15 or 20 years ago. But he seemed like a cool guy. And it's sad to see somebody get their life snuffed out at such a young age. 38 is just so young. That music can mean only one thing. It's time to thank our support staff. I'd like to thank Chris for being here every single week. He's an awesome co-host for the show, and I think he brings a lot to it. Our man on the board, Ray Boom Boom Mancini, doing a great job behind the cameras and doing all the audio stuff. El Presidente, Chet 40 for all of us here at the first round. We want to thank you for watching us here live on a Wednesday. Be sure to be right back here Sunday morning at 9 a.m. We'll have another live, entertaining, vibrant, fact-filled show for you. Until then, all of us here at the St. Jude Studios say take care. We'll see you on Sunday morning at YouTube. Smash that subscription button and tell your friends about the first round. Help us grow to epic proportions. Until Sunday, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.